Well, we've got some special guests here in the studio, and it's very likely if you follow the news in this province, you already know them. For 6 years, Kimberly and Todd Churchill have been fighting for their deaf son Carter's education. The Portugal Cove-St. Philip's couple filed a human rights complaint against the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District back in 2017. And this week, the Churchills learned that they have won their legal battle. The province's English school district has been ordered to pay the Churchills $147,000 by the adjudicator of the case. But despite winning the case, Kimberly and Todd Churchill say this moment is still bittersweet. And the Churchills are here in studio right now. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And after many, many conversations over the years as well, I might add. How did you get the news yesterday? Walk us through it.
Yeah, it was actually Wednesday. So we had advance notice on Sunday from the adjudicator, as the other parties to the claim did, that the decision was going to come out on the 1st of March. So from Sunday to Wednesday, it was a very, very nervous time. You know, our stomach we're nuts, to be honest. We thought we had a strong case. We thought we presented a strong case, but you never know how things are going to go until you get the decision. So I was in my office, and at 8:15, my phone rang, and I looked at it, and it was my lawyer's name, and my heart stopped. And when I picked it up, the first thing, out of his mouth was, this is a landmark case. He was just beaming. He was jumping for joy on the other end of the line. He said this is not just landmark for Newfoundland. This is landmark for the country. So it was a huge rush of emotions.
How did that feel to hear him say you won?
I was at a loss for words. I was, after so many years of pleading and begging and crying, so many tears, asking for people to help us and asking for administrators and school district, telling Carter's story and what was happening to him, and always being told, no, that's your perception. That's not real. Carter's getting a quality education. And to finally get the results that he was discriminated against his entire time at Portugal Cove Elementary for those 4 years, it was a feeling of so much emotion, because we were believed. We were finally believed, and what Carter had suffered was believed. And to know that finally some people were going to be held accountable for what happened to him, I can't even put it into words, to be honest.
And to be honest, in terms of winning, we don't even look at it as winning or losing. There's only degrees of losing, because when Carter has been put in the situation he's been put in for all those years, those long, painful years at Portugal Cove Elementary, and he was totally excluded. We heard testimony from his student assistant who was deaf, who said Carter was just there, like he was ignored. And you can't even put it in terms of winning. We have 6 years of our life gone. We're just, broken. It's just beating us down. So it's not even winning anymore. It's just degrees of losing.
There's a lot to unravel here, and we're going to try to do that over the next little while. First of all, how did Carter react? Does he understand where this is and how important this case was?
Yeah. I mean, we tried to insulate him from that. Now, our other son, he's a bit older, so he is more in tune with what's going on, and we've tried to insulate him from as well, but he is more in tune. But, we've tried to insulate Carter from what's going on at school and tried to normalize his life as much as humanly possible, as we have with our other son, of course, too. But our older son, he's more in tune with what's going on. And when we came home last year, at the last day of the hearing, it was September 9th, our oldest son met us at the door, and he said, it's finally over. He was a 12-year-old boy, and he felt that relief that it was over, and it was very moving. And it was an emotional moment for us when he said that to us.
Yeah. There's been so much stress put on the family over the years, and unfortunately, as much as we've tried to shield our kids from it, they're going to feel some of the ramifications of that. So it was certainly unfolded that day in front of us when our son was just so relieved.
Just remind us, what began this journey for this entire advocacy campaign and 6 years of advocating for your son. How did it all begin?
Well, I mean, Carter started school at Portugal Cove Elementary, and we were so naive back then. We look back, and it's. I always say I'll never forgive myself for being so trusting, and so naive, and so stupid to believe that the English School District and Department of Education actually knew what deaf children needed and would actually provide it. We were so stupid back then, and I'll never forgive myself for being so trusting. I mean, to punctuate how bad kindergarten was at Beachy Cove Elementary, he received 32 hours the entire school year with an itinerant teacher who has some knowledge of ASL, and I say some knowledge because they don't proficiency test. The rest of the time, he was with a mainstream teacher, no ASL at all, who relied on a student assistant who was tested the following summer and who had ASL so poor she could not fingerspell her name on the assessment. And fingerspelling is the very first thing you learn when you learn American Sign Language, and that's how bad it was. And it came out at the hearing, he relied on that person to teach Carter and communicate with Carter. We had an incident where he called Kim and essentially accused me of abusing our child because he didn't understand that Carter was telling him that he hurt his leg and I put a Band-Aid on his leg that morning. I mean, that was quite serious. I could have been, put on charges or investigated for charges for child abuse. And that was a case of he just didn't know what Carter was actually saying to him.
And just to connect the dots, because some people might not be familiar with the story of education for the deaf community here, this connects back to basically the School for the Deaf being closed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so School for the Deaf closed in 2010, and it came out at the hearing that, when that happened, that nobody was prepared to manage any of the deaf children that were born after that. And so what ended up happening was the itinerant teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing ended up absorbing all of these kids onto their roster, and their caseloads became unmanageable. And so when they were in a situation prior to this where they only had to manage children who were actually attending school, they all of a sudden had to also manage children who may have just been found out that they're deaf, maybe wearing cochlear implants, hearing aids, needing ASL. And so it became a situation where everybody lost, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, when Darren King, who was then the education minister, closed the school, he made a press release on August 2nd of 2010 and said that all deaf children now and in future would receive all the supports they had an entitlement to and receive a quality education in line with hearing children, and it just never happened. It was just to take the sting out of closing the School for the Deaf.
Well, it's what you spent the last years fighting for, exactly what was promised. Mm-hmm. How important is ASL to Carter? Just help us understand that part.
Yeah, I guess, how important is English to you? I mean, that would be the short answer. You can't really do anything without an ability to communicate. I mean, everything is, it's the building blocks of everything. You can't learn, you can't develop, you can't grow without a language. And language deprivation, it's so insidious in terms of it impacts all aspects of your life. So, yeah, I mean, it's super important. I mean, that is his first language. It's like if you had a hearing child who had been deprived of English. You can imagine how that would impact a hearing child.
I think a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear that Carter has trouble reading to this day, right? Mm-hmm. Can you connect the dots for us and how you believe this, his own journey with education has led to that?
Well, for Carter, because American Sign Language is his first language and because he was deprived of learning his first language, as Todd just mentioned, your language is your building blocks to everything else. So, and not only that, though, being deaf, Carter did not have access to incidental learning, which a lot of children, who are hearing and all have access to incidental learning.
What does incidental learning mean?
So basically, you could be learning language and words and picking up understanding of worldly concepts if you're watching TV, if you're listening to the radio, if you're hearing conversations take place around you. Carter didn't have access to any of those things. And certainly in school, he didn't have access to any incidental learning because everybody was hearing around him and nobody knew American Sign Language to to be able to help him continue to increase and enhance his own language, which then, because of the lack of American Sign Language in his school, he was not able to access any of the curriculum. One of the biggest problems and hurdles that we had in trying to explain to administrators over the years was that not only did Carter need access to his school curriculum in ASL, but he needed ASL. Mm-hmm. He still was learning his first language. And to be 5 years old and still not have knowledge of your first language, most children come in already knowing how flowers grow, where does the rain come from, may not know like the scientific, obviously, behind it, but know a lot more than what Carter knew.
And one of the plot points along your journey has been informing the school district that the assistance that was provided to Carter was inadequate as well. So resources were provided over the years. Just tell us how they stacked up against what his needs were.
So in kindergarten, immediately the first day I learned that the student assistant was concerned herself about her own ability to be able to communicate with Carter. And she told me that when she had the interview, that she had explained to them that she had done a course a year before in ASL, had never used it. And so she wondered herself whether she was even the perfect match for Carter. And they said, no, don't worry about that. So it was right off the bat, it was obvious to us that Carter's needs were irrelevant. Carter was a 5-year-old boy, so what difference did it make? We knew that deaf children did simply not matter, and that to me was quite concerning. And as time went on, it just became more and more obvious that the needs of Carter were just never going to be met.
What changes now? I mean, with, like you say, this is a bittersweet win. This has been a 6-year-long battle. What changes now for Carter and potentially for other children?
Well, at least now there's been a finding that, deaf children have a right to the same level of support as hearing children. And it's important for people to know this is not about one child. There's other deaf children in this province being discriminated against. And it's a systemic problem, and the adjudicator highlighted that in his finding that he has challenged the Department of Education and district to address this systemic problem. In terms of Carter, I think it'll be lifetime advocacy because we still have challenges even now, even though some supports have been provided. It's still a challenge to get a teacher who can sign, because in this province we don't proficiency test teachers. If you are going to be a French immersion teacher, you will undergo a test called DELF, which will determine your French proficiency. If you're a person teaching hearing children in English and you come from another country, you will be proficiency tested in English. But for ASL doesn't get the same level of proficiency testing or any proficiency testing. The district ensures that hearing children have access to proficient teachers, but they don't do it for deaf children. And that's a struggle we still deal with because they still don't do it.
And it was interesting because the adjudicator actually pointed out in the 116 document when he made his decision that, his feeling was that the English school district did not have a full grasp and understanding that ASL was an actual language and saw it more as therapy.
Yeah, and to punctuate that sentiment, during the hearing, Granway Price, who was the former chair of the Board of Trustees, referred to ASL as hand-speaking. Our jaw dropped when he referred to ASL as hand-speaking. I looked at Kim and I said, I cannot believe I just heard what he just said. That's the level of ignorance there was, hand-speaking.
As you mentioned your lawyer started by saying this is a landmark human rights case. So going back to the number here, I mean, $147,000, does that even begin to cover the costs? Well, let me start for you personally. Legally, does that begin to cover how much this has cost your family? Well,
legally it doesn't. Well, it does and it doesn't. We spent $93,000 in total fighting this. And so the $50,000 is cut into that, and we had a GoFundMe account, and a lot of people supported that, and that was $29,000 more. So we're still now in debt, probably about $15,000. So the award of the $50,000 to help cover some of the legal fees is really, really important, because it's important for people to understand, we're not rich people. We didn't have $100,000 in a mattress that we just go and pull a wad of money out when we get an invoice. I mean, we had an invoice just before Christmas for $31,000. I mean, we couldn't absorb that. And, we went into debt for this. And it's really important for people to know that, And we really feel strongly that the district never thought they had a defense. Their only strategy was to bankrupt us. And they thought if they bled us financially, we would give up because the district had a Newfoundland taxpayer footing their legal bills. The district had a private law firm at exorbitant rates with multiple resources, all footed by the Newfoundland taxpayer. And we were footing our own bills. So I think they really thought if they wore us down financially and bankrupted us, we'd give up.
2 questions left. The issue of accountability. Where do you go from here? Will somebody be held accountable for this?
I really hope so. Like, I'm going to publicly call out Andrew Furey on this one because in July of 2020, when he was running for the Liberal leadership, we invited him to come to our house. He sat in my lawn chair on my deck. We told him for an hour all the problems in deaf education. So he knows, and he knows personally. So he can't say there's no deniability on his part. So our expectation now is there will be some accountability taken by the Premier and by his government. They will acknowledge the finding, they will accept the finding, and they will say, we messed up. We made a mistake here, and we will get a formal apology from Andrew Furey to our child and for what his government and other Liberal governments before him have done. The government likes to talk about accountability and transparency. Great time for Andrew Furey to demonstrate that. And if he doesn't, I think it'll speak volumes about Andrew Furey as a premier.
At the center of all this, your son, Carter. I am still absorbing that image you painted of him sitting there quietly, not being able to speak with his teachers, not understanding what's going on, even even the other students in his class. What is the road to recovery and amending this going to look like, even socializing? How do you begin to heal after this?
The adjudicator really made some very huge statements in his decision that I think painted a picture that I, as his mother, and I'm sure Todd will say the same as his father, was hard to read, but it was something that we weren't surprised to read because it's something that we feared. And his concern was that he's seeing Carter as being the most vulnerable client that he can conceive of, and that he was concerned by the long-term, potentially permanent impact that the language deprivation has had on Carter, the social isolation, the exclusion, and how is this going to follow him into his adult years. Long term, will he even become independent? And, as we mentioned earlier, he's now 12 years old and he's not even able to read a book yet. So we have great concerns. A lot of work, needs to be done with Carter, but a lot of understanding and a lot of patience needs to be had.
I want to thank you both for being so open and making the time over the last number of years to share this. I know it's not easy to talk about, but you've done it. What's the reaction been from people that have been following this journey?
It's been overwhelming. Once the hearing ended, from the day it ended, the very next day people started asking, when will the decision come out? When will we know? And over the last months, we get so many emails and messages from people saying, when will we get the decision? Because there's so many people watched it. One of the things the Human Rights Commission did for the first time ever, they live streamed the hearing. It's never been done before. And at one point, over the course of the 9 days, there was over 4,000 people at different times watching the hearing. So there was a lot of interest in the case.
Thank you both so much for telling us more details about this and what it means. And we'll be thinking about Carter as well. Wishing your whole family the best of luck.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Kimberly and Todd Churchill, advocates for their son and deaf children in this province. They live in Portugal Cove, and this week they won their case.
Overheard